we might get started. So I would like to welcome everyone to this webinar looking at the COP28 energy efficiency target and what it means for Australia. I'm very excited today to welcome two guests to join me on this panel, Dr. Nicholas Howarth from the IEA and Amandine Denis-Ryan from IEFA. And we're going to be explaining a little bit about the target's background, where it came from, starting with Nick at the IEA. I will then go through a little bit around what the metrics means for Australia and historically how Australia has performed on this metric. And then I'll hand over to Amandine, who's going to talk about some really fascinating modelling work that they've done to look at the benefits that might accrue if Australia does really up its performance on energy efficiency. So I would like to now, before I go any further, acknowledge the country on which we're all meeting from today and the traditional owners of the country. In my case, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne. And I'd also like to acknowledge any elders past, present, or emerging who are on the call today. The next thing I'd like to do is introduce Dr. Nicholas Howarth. Nick and I worked together in Paris when I was at the IEA, and he is currently an energy analyst in the Energy Efficiency Division. It is now called the Office of Energy Efficiency and Inclusive Transition. I should be more specific. He leads the market report on energy efficiency there, which is the annual tracker of energy efficiency trends. And Nick comes to us with very well credentialed. He has a PhD from the Oxford University, specialising in carbon markets, and has worked around the world advising governments in Australia, the UK, Europe, China, Saudi Arabia, amongst others. So Nick, I'm going to hand over to you, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you've got for us. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. From early in the morning here in a fairly cool but sunny Paris at IEA headquarters. I'd like to thank the Australian Energy Efficiency Council for this invitation and putting on the event, and for you all to be joining us here at what we think is very much a historic moment that's shaping up for the stepping up of policy ambition in the world of energy efficiency. Much of what I'll be talking about today is available in two publications of ours, recent publications that are available online. One is the agency's annual energy efficiency market report, which tracks the latest policy, technology, and market trends on energy efficiency. And the other is an in-depth country review of Australia's energy policies, which was also conducted last year, which goes into a lot of the details of at the sectoral level that I won't be able to get in today, but that's available for you to look into should you wish. So I'm going to be talking a bit about what the doubling target is, some recent trends at the global level and how countries compare, as well as next steps in terms of tracking progress and strengthening policy ambition to rise to this new level of ambition in this doubling target. So in a nutshell, if there's one slide to pay attention to where everything is that you need to know, this is it. What is the doubling target? Well, to measure the doubling goal, we use the metric of primary energy intensity, the ratio of energy use to GDP. And the general trend is that energy intensity goes down each year as the global economy becomes more efficient. Thus, we define an improvement as the yearly percentage decrease in global energy intensity. So in 2022, we saw an improvement of 2%, which means for each unit of energy used in 2022 produced 2% more GDP. And according to the IEA's net zero pathway, annual progress needs to double from this baseline of 2% per year to an average of more than 4% per year between now and 2030. So 2% was the rate achieved in 2022, as well as being the long-term average. And there's lots of benefits associated with stepping up this rate of progress in energy intensity, including obviously reduction of CO2 emissions, reducing energy bills by around a third, as well as providing one of the biggest drivers of jobs in the clean energy transition moving forward. So there's really a lot at play and stake in terms of stepping up ambition. So a little bit about what happened and why this is such a significant moment. So COP28 saw, as part of the final text, saw a historic agreement to double the rate of energy efficiency improvements by 2030. And this was probably the most prominent, the highest prominence ever achieved and visibility for energy efficiency at one of these COP events. And it came after a long and very deliberate strategy from countries and international organizations to build momentum around this. And 1 week before the final COP result, 132 countries, including the support of Australia, signed the Global Renewables and Energy Efficiency Pledge, which provided a little bit more detail, which was to commit to work together in order to collectively double this global average rate of energy efficiency improvements from 2 to over 4% every year until 2030. So this provided a lot of the diplomatic foundation at the COP event. But before the COP event, in June last year, the IEA held its annual Global Energy Efficiency Conference, where 46 countries, including with the very valuable support of Australia, supported the concept of doubling the rate of energy efficiency, creating the diplomatic and policy momentum to get the result at COP. And this also was supported through the G20 and India's G20 and Japan's G7 presidency. So the point to make here is that there really was a lot of diplomatic foundation coming through from countries supported by international organizations, particularly the IEA, in shaping this global goal. And in terms of the analytical provenance of this, it really stemmed from the landmark IEA Net Zero report, which was released in 2021 and looked into in more detail in the energy efficiency market report of that year, where we first put forward the concept of the rate of the progress doubling from this 2% to 4%. And there is a lot of, obviously, analytical foundations behind this target that fed into the diplomatic and policy momentum that we saw coming in the years subsequent. And with over 40 global avoided energy demands identified as part of this work and elements that support the doubling between now, 2025, 2030, and through to 2050, of what needs to be done in quite a pragmatic way in terms of some of these milestones. So, but at a very high level, what feeds into the increase in annual progress from 2 to 4%, roughly 3 different pillars. We have electrification and renewables, so this fuel switching, including clean cooking, which provides about a third, because when you switch, say, from gas to electric heating, or from petrol to to electricity for your vehicle, it actually radically improves the efficiency as well as switching to a different fuel source. Technical efficiency is pretty much all efficiency which doesn't involve fuel switching. So this is your more efficient televisions and refrigerators and air conditioners, and other avoided demand, things like resource efficiency, recycling in industry, and also behavioral change. And so all of these things, different measures that you saw on the previous page, they take us up to this increased level of 4% per year. Now, what's really significant in the short term, because the energy system is still dominated by fossil fuels, energy efficiency, energy savings can drive some of the biggest CO2 reductions out of all the mitigation measures open for governments. And actually, this doubling provides around 50% of the emissions reductions globally by 2030 in the IEA's net zero scenario. And if we look at how countries have performed against the 4% per annum goal, if we look into the past, last decade before the onset of COVID, which disrupted energy and economic markets. So to get a clearer picture, we look at the trend between 2010 and 2019. And here we see the annual rate of progress on the left and the size of energy consumption along the x-axis in terms of the most significant countries. One country, the United Kingdom, consistently hit 4% over the last decade. Many countries have come close. Australia's pretty much bang on the global average at around 2%, along with countries such as the US, which is also very close to that level. So what happened last year in terms of progress? We've seen a general slowdown in energy intensity improvement following the COVID crisis. There's been a strong uptick following the energy crisis and higher energy costs in 2022, which is still feeding in to many markets. But 2023, we saw slower global progress, mainly due to very energy intensive growth in China. But other markets in most advanced economies averaged around 4% in that year. So there are two radically different, or three energy futures that are possible depending on this rate of intensity progress, because what we're really talking about are different energy demand futures. So for the same amount of GDP, if we're looking at the columns on the right-hand side, which show the GDP and total primary energy, TES, total energy supply, with three different scenarios into the future, to produce the same economic growth, whether we're averaging 2%, 3%, or 4% annual energy intensity improvement, essentially means whether or not energy demand is growing at around 1%, is about stable in the case of 3% intensity improvement, or is declining actually as the economy grows, which is what happens in a 4% scenario. And this has huge implications, not just for energy security and geopolitics of energy, but also importantly for energy prices, because lower energy demand always generally means lower energy prices as well for consumers and more stable energy markets. And it's really key efficiency to the peaking of fossil fuels, because as we see electrification gathering pace, we have in this chart, we show that for residential gas, for example, around 35 countries have either hit a plateau or declining demand for residential gas consumption. So residential gas is on the way out in many markets. And similarly for gasoline, we see energy demand has actually peaked. So this is petrol in cars in over 90 countries around the world. So efficiency, electrification is really leading to this peaking of fossil fuel demand in many markets around the world. Looking at the policies, some of the key policies, minimum energy performance standards that are driving some of these transformations. The good news is that in most places, these policies are in place, and in some countries, they're already at the levels needed to hit the 4% annual improvements, whether we're looking at lighting, air conditioning, industrial motors, or cars. And many countries have plans in place to strengthen and put in targets. And Australia is one of these, with plans underway for both lighting and vehicles, which will significantly lift the rate of the efficiency of products in the market over the next decade. So to scale up progress, obviously, there's a package of policy measures across regulation, information, and incentives that is needed to be set within this broader high-level target setting. And just to conclude, in terms of the next steps at the international level, the IEA will be holding the 9th Annual Global Conference on Energy Efficiency in Nairobi in a couple of weeks, which will really be a pivotal moment. It's the first time energy ministers have gathered since COP28 to discuss high ambition on energy efficiency, and also provide that high-level forum for exchange and learning on how implementation is being pursued. And we'll be working with governments to provide practical, action-oriented steps to develop and implement those policies, such as integrating the target into the next round of nationally determined contributions, NDCs. So with that, I'll leave it there and hand over to Jeremy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. And I'm very glad to hear that the IEA is planning on helping countries to focus on implementation. Given the numbers we've seen in your charts there, the challenge is going to be big to get us to that 4% number, and we have a very limited time frame available. So glad to hear that the implementation is a focus at the conference coming up in Nairobi. I am now going to share my screen. We're going to take questions at the end of the 3 presentations. So I encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A as has been pointed out in the chat, or you can hold them up onto the end and ask them once we've finished the presentations. So I'm going to take over now, and my presentation is designed to kind of give the audience here a bit of an overview of what the metric means. Before I do, I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of things. First of all, the EEC. For those of you who don't know, we are the industry peak body focused on improving Australia's energy performance through energy efficiency, electrification, and decarbonisation as well. We have a broad membership, as you can see from this slide, including members of different companies, large and small across Australia, research institutes, and government organisations as well. I want to make a quick plug for a conference that we're putting on. If you can't make it to Nairobi, come to Sydney. Next week, we have our national conference, and it's going to be excellent. We have a really all-star lineup, including our keynote speaker, Amory Lovins. For those of you who don't know, Amory is one of the world's foremost experts in energy efficiency. So I encourage you to register and come along if you haven't already done so. So let's get to the content now. What is primary energy intensity? I wanted to just do a quick 101 on this. I think it's an important point to make. Primary energy intensity is essentially primary energy demand divided by economic growth. But I think it's worth looking at what primary energy is. This is the raw materials that go into making the energy that we use in our homes and businesses. So things like the coal or the wind that it goes into a wind turbine. Those go into their technologies and are converted into final energy, which ends up in our homes and businesses and industry. The reason I wanted to just talk about this a little bit is because when it comes to primary energy intensity, changes on the demand side, where our little house is, have an impact on that metric, but changes on the supply side also have an impact. And that's the key thing I want you to remember as we go forward through this presentation. The reason this matters is because as we shift to renewables, we will find that our primary energy intensity will improve because of the way that renewables are accounted for in global energy balances. And I've put some numbers up here. For example, if you take some coal, you burn it in a coal-fired power plant, it might have an efficiency of around 30%. And therefore, there's a big difference between 0.3 and 1. And so when you start to replace that coal-fired power with renewable power for energy, then you find that your primary energy intensity will improve. So key point is both supply and demand in the energy system contribute to improving the metric. We'll come back to this later. So how has Australia been going on in recent years, or the last few decades really? We've improved by about 1 to 2% per year on average, and you can see that that is each decade we've been getting better and better. The last decade, as Nick mentioned in his presentation, is affected by COVID, and so that 2.5% there has a little asterisk there because it's probably a little lower than that. As Nick said, around 2, I think, from between 2010 and 2019. We have, over the last 20 years or so, improved our primary energy intensity by about 30%. So this is a chart showing our performance in the green dotted line there against other countries that are also developed economies. And you can see they're kind of all doing similar things. Nick mentioned in his presentation, the UK has done consistently very well. I would say to any UK people on the call, that's largely because of structural changes in your economy. Well done for you for shifting toward becoming a finance powerhouse and not manufacturing much anymore. But hey, that's an argument for another day. But the point is that we have been declining. However, we are still remaining as one of the most energy intensive developed countries in the world. So if you look at the orange series there, we used to be sort of around the 3rd most energy intensive in the year 2000 compared to these other countries. We're now the 2nd most energy intensive, although our energy intensity has gone down. So the difference between the orange and the blue bar in Australia is that 30% I mentioned in the previous slide. Another thing to take out from this slide is that 2 countries on the right-hand side, the most energy intensive, are countries that dig up things from the ground and sell them. The US is similar, but also has a much bigger manufacturing sector. But that also affects this metric. You know, what sort of economic activities the countries do has a really big impact on this primary energy intensive metric. So what has been driving these falls in primary energy intensity in Australia now? Well, demand side energy efficiency has definitely made an impact. This is a decomposition that the International Energy Agency does. It's a free data set. I highly recommend you go and check it out. The source is at the bottom. And you can see that in final energy demand, this is the dotted blue line in the middle there, it's been fairly flat, despite the fact that activity has increased. So activity in this case is GDP. The economy has grown quite significantly since the year 2000. Despite that, energy hasn't really gone up at the same rate. And that's because of 2 factors. One is the structural changes that have taken place in Australia. I was paying out the UK earlier, but Australia has also benefited from this structural change where we produce less, for better or worse, we produce less in our manufacturing sector, and we produce more in our services sector, which is less energy intensive. So that's the orange line structure. And efficiency has also improved. So we are becoming more energy efficient. However, despite those changes, our end-use energy efficiency still remains comparatively poor when you look at what's going on in other countries. So this is some indicators, again, from the IEA, looking at different end uses in the residential sector, and we can see that for space cooling, for example, on a per dwelling basis, Australia's energy use per dwelling for space cooling is the highest out of these countries. We also have fairly high usage for our appliances, and then even the darker orange bar there of water heating is pretty much, I think that's the highest as well. So you can see there's work to do to improve our end-use energy intensity or energy efficiency. On the industry side, it's similar. That we don't have data for all the countries, for all of these economic sectors, or the IEA doesn't have data, but you can see for the ones they do have data for, Australia is pretty high when it comes to chemicals production, for example. Manufacturing is also more energy intensive than most of the other countries here. our basic metals is pretty good. Now that's a good thing to note about where we're going in that front. So you can see there is work to be done, despite that 30% decrease in the primary energy intensity indicator. When you look at the end users, Australia has work to do. The other thing to point out is that the shift to renewables has also helped us improve our primary energy intensity over that period. This is some data that comes from the Australian Energy Update or Energy Statistics. And you can see it's the change in thermal electricity generation over the last 3 decades. The thermal electricity generation is, burning things to create electricity, coal and gas. And you can see that we were increasing in the 90s our thermal electricity generation, but then around the turn of the century, we started to decrease. This decreasing trend came in, and that's definitely been helping out. Now, if I take you back to that first slide, the 101 that I gave earlier, I wanted you to remember that primary energy intensity is affected both by the supply and the demand side. And here we're seeing that the supply side, the shift to renewables has been occurring, and that will definitely be having an impact on our primary energy intensity. You can see the impact when you do a decomposition of Australia's emissions. And when you do that, you can see that in this last period since 2015 from 2015 to 2021, energy demand has, sorry, not energy demand, this is emissions we're talking about. Emissions have decreased. There's been an absolute decrease in emissions, and that has been due to 2 main factors, energy efficiency, and then what the IEA is calling carbon intensity of our energy supply, but that really just means the shift to renewables. So renewables and energy efficiency together have resulted in this absolute decline in our energy-related emissions. And we can therefore say that they've also had both have had an impact on our primary energy intensity. So the message I want you to take out from all of this, data and imagery that I've been showing you is that we really want to focus our efforts on the demand side in order to double our energy efficiency improvement rate in this country, because there's a lot of potential to do so there. So if we think about this, I should mention that Australia has a second target that was signed up to at COP28, and that is a target to triple renewables. So we've committed to both, and as I pointed out, achieving the tripling renewables target will have an impact on the supply side. And that's a good thing. It will, on the supply side of the energy efficiency improvement, it will have an impact on that primary energy intensity metric, and that's a good thing. But we also want to make sure that we do everything possible to improve the energy efficiency on the demand side. And that's really because there are multiple benefits to doing so, as we know so well, from health to productivity, environmental benefits like air quality improvements in people's homes, and also financial benefits. And we are going to hear some detail on the sort of financial benefits that will flow if we tackle demand side energy efficiency in the next presentation from Amandine. So what does it mean for policy? Well, Australia has been making policy change in recent years. This is mainly federal initiatives. Of course, the states and territories have also been very active in the last decade, but there has been a flurry of activity. These are some of the policies that have been announced that will have an impact and help improve our primary energy intensity. I won't go through them one by one. The last one on the list, though, is the one I will focus on just a little bit, the National Energy Performance Strategy. And so the strategy came out a couple of weeks ago, and it included, for the first time, a nice recognition of the importance of demand flexibility, energy efficiency, and electrification for improving our energy performance. It was really nicely articulated. It included a commitment that energy performance will be part of the 6 decarbonisation plans and various other things on the list there on the left. However, there's still a lot that could be done to improve our energy performance. We had a question already come through asking whether there was anything in there to improve motors MEPS. No, there wasn't. And there was also not much there in the way of these things on the right. We didn't see any quantitative targets that other countries who have done really well on their energy performance often have. The EU has EU-wide quantitative targets, and all of the member states tend to have them as well. We also didn't see much in the way of expanding mandatory disclosure to the residential sector or expanding commercial building disclosure as well. or any measures for helping states and territories to implement minimum rental standards. And then finally, and the final point, there's really a big push that's needed to reform the way we think about the demand side and the way we govern it. And we think that a lot of work needs to be done there at the EEC as well. So a good start, but really more detail, policy detail needed to make that strategy have teeth. I will finish my presentation there and happy to have a chat about policy in the Q&A, but for now I will hand over to Amandine. So thanks for listening. And Amandine, while you are getting your screen up, I will stop. Sorry, not stop sharing it. I'm going to stop my video. And are you able to take over?
Yes, but your slides are still up.
Sorry about that. I'll stop. There we go. And while Amandine is getting ready, I'll briefly introduce her. So Amandine is CEO at the Institute for Energy. Sorry, have I got this right? Yes, I do. I am on. I didn't realize I thought my mic was off, but sorry, let me start again. Amandine is CEO at the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, a global independent think tank which provides financial analysis related to energy markets, trends, policies, and with a mission to accelerate the energy transition. Prior to her role at IEFA, she held senior leadership positions at Climate Works and also worked at McKinsey in the past. So Amandine, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Jeremy. And as Jeremy mentioned, I will be focusing my presentation on the opportunities, especially on the demand side of the equation. And I don't need to introduce us because Jeremy did that very well. So I'll jump straight in. So first, I will spend some time discussing some of the large untapped opportunities to improve energy efficiency in Australia. So we've done a lot of work recently on residential appliances. This is a space where mature technologies can deliver a step change in efficiency. So the graphs presented on this slide show the relative energy required by appliances to deliver an equivalent service benchmarked against the least efficient appliance in each category. So you can see that gas appliances, which are in black on the graphs, are typically the least efficient type of appliance. And that's particularly true for gas ducted heating system, where a lot of energy is wasted in distribution losses. At the opposite end, heat pump-based appliances like reverse cycle air conditioners or heat pump hot water systems are extremely efficient, about 3 to 5 times more efficient than traditional resistive electric appliances, and about 3 to 8 times more efficient than gas-based appliances. So while heat pump-based appliances are typically more expensive upfront, these energy savings mean that they're actually materially cheaper to own over the lifespan. So in Victoria, we calculated that a household would save about $1,200 each year if it replaced its gas appliances with efficient electric alternatives at the end of their life. But despite this, we estimated that around 940,000 new gas appliances and 800,000 new resistive electric appliances are still installed every year. And so these nearly 2 million inefficient appliances cost an unnecessary $3.4 billion in extra lifetime costs for households across the country. So this is the cost of each year of delay to moving to high efficiency appliances. New South Wales and Victoria are the most affected states with over 1 billion unnecessary costs locked in each year. And for most states, the largest opportunity is to upgrade from resistive electric equipment. But in Victoria and ACT, it is to upgrade from gas equipment. Another large untapped opportunity is thermal efficiency upgrades. So a study there's not a lot of data on the thermal efficiency of houses in Australia, but a study by Sustainability Victoria, SV, found that a representative sample of existing houses rated at about 1.8 energy stars on average, compared with 7 stars for new homes since the start of this month. And a material portion of the stock rated at 1 star or less, which means that they would need more than 5 times more energy than a recent home to achieve the same level of comfort. And in the Victorian study, households achieved more than 40% savings on their gas use for heating by implementing draft ceiling and ceiling insulation measures at a cost of about $1,400. So to put that in perspective, that gave them an annual rate of return of 16%. That's better than a lot of investments. Another SV study found that every dollar saved on energy, for every dollar saved on energy, more than $10 were saved in health costs, with material improvements in quality of life for vulnerable households. There's also many untapped opportunities to improve energy efficiency in industry. In Victoria, SV also found that food and beverage manufacturers could significantly cut their energy costs with interventions offering paybacks shorter than 2 years. A New South Wales program run by A2EP recently looked at compressed air systems, which represent 10% of industrial electricity use. So across about 50 sites, energy costs were more than halved through interventions with paybacks of 6 months. And they also found that alternative technologies could deliver up to 90% energy savings. Over 10 years ago, when I was at Cloudworks, I did a lot of work with the industry department based on data from the Energy Efficiency Opportunities, or EEO, program, which required large industrial users to report on their energy efficiency opportunities. We found that the top 20% of companies saved about 14% of their energy use. And that was about 6 times the average. And that trend and ratio was very similar across all sectors, and it didn't change with the energy intensity of the company. The main differentiating factor that we identified was whether companies regularly analyzed their energy data. And since the closure of that program in 2014, there has been no comprehensive government program targeted at industrial energy efficiency, and in particular at building the capabilities in the sector and encouraging companies implement best practices. So now I'm going to talk about how energy efficiency can not only save money, but it's also critical to the energy transition. Focusing on how we can reduce gas demand rather than increasing supply is very important because there's simply no space for new gas developments under the Paris Agreement. The IEA estimated that we now have enough locked-in investments in oil and gas projects to meet demand under a 2.4-degree scenario, and much more than what is needed under the Paris Agreement. And this is particularly because the Ukraine war triggered an enormous amount of investments in gas supply. So IFR recently released its global LNG outlook, and we calculated that new confirmed LNG projects that will come online by 2028 are equivalent to 40% of the existing LNG capacity globally. This is the fastest wave of new capacity increase ever in the LNG industry. And we're now expecting an LNG supply glut in the next 2 years. So that makes it really critical to prioritize gas demand reduction to gas supply increase. At the moment, AEMO expects that gas supply will reduce faster than gas demand in the southern states of Australia. That will lead to excess gas demand from 2027 onwards. The public debate has been discussing a lot the need to increase gas supply to meet this gap. But instead, we found that there is enough opportunity to improve energy efficiency and to accelerate cost-effective electrification in the residential and industrial sectors to eradicate the excess gas demand, or at least delay it by 10 years. And the largest opportunity is to shift to efficient electric appliances at end of life. And in total, we found that cost-effective measures could reduce gas demand in the southern states by about 80% by 2045 and by over 40% by 2030. And that's before we even started looking at what we could do in harder to abate sectors and with more complex solutions. Another important benefit of improving energy efficiency is that it can make the electricity transition easier. By reducing electricity demand, we can reduce the capacity of new renewable generation required to meet the 82% renewable electricity target. So, for example, we calculated that moving from resistive to heat pump-based appliances across Australia would reduce residential electricity demand by over 12 terawatt-hours, or nearly 20% of today's residential electricity use. This could more than compensate for the increase in electricity that would come from moving from gas appliances to electric appliances. And this is only for appliances. It does not include thermal efficiency upgrades or opportunities in the commercial and industrial sectors, where we know that there's a lot of untapped potential. Another way in which efficient electrification can make the renewable electricity transition easier is by providing a really large source of flexible demand. Electric water heating, in particular, could be set to run in the middle of the day when solar generation is the highest and reduce minimum demand issues and act like an energy storage system. UTS recently found that if water heating was electrified fast, efficiently, and made flexible, it could provide 22 gigawatts of storage or 45 gigawatt hours of flexible demand per day by 2040. That's about 60% of AEMO's forecast for distributed storage. And this would provide over 6 billion savings for consumers by 2040. However, there's no requirements currently for hot water systems to be made flexible, and the default settings are generally still for them to run overnight. We've heard as well that electric vehicles are also a big opportunity to improve energy efficiency, and they also have other benefits. Recent analysis by NX for ARENA found that by 2050, the total battery storage on wheels in Australia will be about 4 times the total storage requirements in the NEM, the National Energy Market. So vehicle to grid from only 10% of electric vehicles could provide 37% of total NEM storage needs. And that would offset about $94 billion of large-scale battery storage investments at current prices. However, these benefits were not included in the cost-benefit analysis used to decide on the new vehicle efficiency standards. So we've just seen how accelerating energy efficiency, including efficient electrification, can deliver multiple financial and economic benefits to Australians, especially if made flexible and well integrated in the energy system. But more government action is needed to capture this potential. We need updated appliances standards and to move to all electric homes. We need a comprehensive industrial energy efficiency program, equal or even higher priority for demand-side solutions compared to supply-side solutions, because too many government agencies still have a big bias towards the supply side. We need hot water and electric vehicle integration strategies, and we still need to address transition challenges, including supply chains, skills and capabilities, and financing solutions to make sure that efficient technologies, which cost more upfront but less over the lifespan, are affordable for everyone. So I'll stop here. Thanks everyone for your attention. You can find all our research on our website, ifa.org, and don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Amandine. And it's great to see some hard numbers behind what we often talk about as being a huge untapped potential. But it's lovely to see all written down in very nicely presented charts that we can use when we want to make this case to people who don't understand the demand side. So I really appreciate your work. Now, I have seen a lot of questions coming up in the Q&A. We have answered a lot of them through text-based answers, but we are happy to take some more questions now. We have about 15 minutes remaining. I can see that Rob Van der Wielen has his hand up. Now, Rob, I'm not sure if you're able to unmute yourself and ask you a question, but if you are, go ahead.
Well, how is the government going to support, like if you have households, how are they going to make sure, like appliances that have been mentioned, that they are going to be feeling and getting supported to make the switch from moving away from gas to electricity or more efficient appliances? How are they going to make that an easy transition? Because at the moment, people are still feeling that their return on investment is not going to be effective, or it's really too long for the appliance to be surviving. So how is the government going to be making an intensifying that option?
It's a good question. We don't have anyone from the government on the call, of course. So any answers here will just be us based on our knowledge of what's going on across Australian policy. Look, it's a good question because it is challenging. Let's not pretend that just because there's all this untapped opportunity that it's going to happen because it's economically efficient to do so. We've seen for many, many years that all of these opportunities that we know make sense aren't being taken up. And there are various barriers that explain that. For example, you know, how is a renter going to pull out their gas appliance if they don't have ownership over that appliance or the building fabric? So that classic landlord-tenant problem will continue to be a problem when we want to electrify the buildings that are using gas currently. So what are governments doing? Well, you will have seen states in particular have taken some real leadership on this, and in Victoria, where I'm based, there has been a very clear signal set by government that they intend to shift to electrification as the main way of achieving their decarbonisation goals in the energy sector. They've set up what is called the gas substitution roadmap, trying to provide very clear signals to industry that it's coming. And they are updating that roadmap as we speak with various different regulatory changes they're proposing, changes to things like the Victorian Energy Upgrades Scheme, which is a market-based energy efficiency scheme that helps provide subsidies to reduce the upfront cost of electric appliances. There's a whole bunch of regulatory change needed on plumbing regulations, for example, as well. So that's all underway. It's all happening. And as well as that, the federal government recently has sort of started to explore, I suppose, what they can do from their perspective in terms of setting signals. We're going to be seeing a lot coming out later this year with the decarbonisation plans that the federal government's working on. And those plans, I imagine, will outline some of the ways that they think they can help this transition happen. I'm going to hand over to anyone else in the panel who wants to have a crack at answering this one, though. Amandine or Nick. Nick, if you have any insights from other countries as well, I'm happy to hear those.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy, and thanks for the question. I think this is one of the big strategic sort of hot topics in efficiency at the moment, is how to transition away from gas in residential heating. And what we see is there's 34 out of 78 countries that we track have hit that plateau or are declining in terms of their residential gas use. In terms of in Australia, this gas consumption is increasing still at the residential level around 1.5% per year. So that's the long-term average. And so they're still in that increasing per year. And what countries are doing, certainly in Europe after the energy crisis hit and the transition away from Russian gas, a lot of countries have brought in plans to phase out the sale of new gas connections for new builds, and that's often the first step. And obviously the easier topic, the easier sort of politically solutions to subsidize the installation, so using the carrot as well as the stick to subsidize the installation of heat pumps. But it does require momentum, because as gas prices had fallen in the last year, we've also seen a drop off in the pace and intensity of new heat pump installations. And the market needs to be ready in terms of the installers, the labor force that can bring these heat pumps into market at scale. And I think Amandine talked about that quite nicely. So, but many countries are doing that, have done this transition already to stabilize and start to decline energy consumption. So we see that covering about 50% of global residential gas demand is in that plateau decline category.
And maybe just to add a little bit to what's already been said. So yeah, there's, as you said, stopping the new connections is often the first step, and Victoria and ACT have already signaled, have already done that. And Victoria, for example, recently banned gas networks from offering incentives to consumers for buying new gas appliances. And New South Wales and Victoria are offering those incentives. And in New South Wales, we've seen a quadrupling in the uptake of heat pump hot water systems. And in Victoria, we're hearing that it's also increasing now. But yeah, providing that clarity on the end game is quite important because there are still discussions, for example, of gas networks moving to hydrogen or biogas. And we have found in our analysis that this is just not a financially viable solution for residential energy use. So being very clear that the future is electricity, developing plans for the phase out of gas assets and how that's going to be, who's going to pay for that, as well as really thinking about those mandates and shifting all appliances to the most efficient alternatives, and then thinking about those financing solutions. I think that's going to be a really important part of the solution to make sure that it's really affordable.
Thanks, Amandine. I've seen a question in the Q&A around industry, and it's from Paul, who is saying, in industry, there's big opportunities that seem to have been forgotten for the last 30 years. We've known about improvements to compressed air, heat recovery, steam systems, etc. Why aren't these opportunities being taken up? Amandine, in your presentation, you mentioned the Energy Efficiency Opportunities Program and some of the data that you were using from that. What, in your opinion, is one of the reasons why some of these opportunities aren't being taken up? Is there any learnings that came out of that program, for example?
Well, I mean, there were a lot of elements in that program. I think some of the reason why it was effective, and when I was revisiting the data, I was reminded that during the Energy Efficiency Opportunities Program, energy efficiency improvement rate in industry tripled in Australia compared to historical rates. So it was a successful program. And some of the elements for that is there was a real focus on capabilities. So the companies, implemented, had people in charge of energy efficiency, and it was also, it had to be signed at the board level. So there was that real visibility to the board. But yeah, there was a lot of community of practices that, I mean, I can't remember all the elements, but there was this real focus on making sure that the companies were building the capabilities internally. And anecdotally, what we found is the companies that did well were the ones that had really internalized it compared to the ones that had that were relying on consultants and so on, and were treating it as a more compliant element. What we heard, the companies that did really well are the ones that were like asking, why does boiler A consume more than boiler B? Why are we consuming electricity on the weekends when we're not supposed to? Like these kind of questions that really make you look at your energy use and understand where you're using it and why and how you can achieve big savings from process improvements like this. So capabilities to me is a big area, and that visibility and the discussion between the finance and the energy side.
Yeah, and that absolutely gels with what we hear as well from our members, that in a lot of these businesses, often it's just an organizational issue where the CEO or the financial head doesn't talk to the sustainability manager, and that communication breakdown just means that there isn't a culture of doing this. We'd also talk about the importance of data and sub-metering. In order to know that you have a problem, you need to be able to measure it. That's a big policy check. There's a policy opportunity there, we think, for improving that. And New South Wales has done a pretty good job in trying to incentivize better metering and monitoring in industry there. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why those opportunities aren't being taken up. I think the experience with the EEO program proved that with a regulatory stick sometimes does help. The fact that it was mandatory to report the opportunities that were economic under 3 years made a real difference in that case as well. Nick, did you want to add anything around industry and I suppose any leaders globally that are doing a great job on industry energy efficiency, or what sort of policies you're seeing out there?
Yeah, there's it's probably one of the biggest opportunities in terms of being one of the largest energy consuming sectors. The countries that are making progress tend to set fairly strong sector-wide targets. And so if we look at, say, China, India, big industrial countries, but quite different, with heavy industry in China and more manufacturing, smaller enterprises, medium enterprises in India. The Perform Achieve a Trade scheme in India is really probably one of the global benchmarks in how to set to set caps on overall energy consumption and allow companies to trade if they exceed their energy savings, and that's been very much instrumental in driving improved performance in India, and China has definitely gone a long way with the heavy industry targets to phase down and phase out the least efficient production.
Yeah, thanks. And look, you know, I did put that in my slide deck, a bit of advocacy around the fact that the National Energy Performance Strategy was missing quantitative targets, unfortunately, which is one of the things we were really hoping it would contain, because we are aware that in other countries, those targets have been critical to driving action. I see a question here from Lorraine, who is talking about behaviour change and being very challenging and a long-term change that needs to occur if we're going to achieve the sort of improvements. And she's asking whether we can suggest any strategies to accelerate the conversion to electricity, or maybe to a more efficient electric appliances and processes, other than financial. Is there anything else that can help drive behaviour change? Maybe just putting aside the measures to encourage it for a second, Nick, I'm aware that in the IEA's modelling, behaviour change actually seems to make a fairly big chunk of the action. It's not just changing out technologies. I've noticed in the scenarios, there's quite a big wedge of action dedicated to behaviour change. Can you talk us through a little bit about what sort of things the IEA is modelling?
Sure. Well, there are two big elements there. One is the behaviour change by households, which are relating to, say, transport behaviour and how we use energy in the home. But another huge chunk, about half of that behaviour change, is industry and resource efficiency. So things like recycling materials in the building sector, you know, plastics. All of this helps reduce the need for primary material construction. So you can use recycled products. It's generally much more energy efficient. So those are the two big bits, but definitely for households, it's transport and energy use in the home, in terms of how we travel, as well as things such as thermostat control. Heating and cooling is the #1 energy use in the home, but transport's a really big one as well. And in terms of ways we can upscale it, I think when we look at, you know, we all can relate to this, because I think we all struggle to manage our energy behavior in the best possible way. And certainly providing more information to consumers can be very powerful. And I think the digital tools that are increasingly coming online help us do this so much. They help us with our own health. We have this information available to us, we're more likely to act on it. If you think about your smart watch, but if you have a smart meter that's telling you all the time where energy is being consumed in your house, where there might be a problem in terms of waste that you didn't know about, people are often very surprised at the changes that can make a huge difference, like leaving a window open when you're heating or cooling and things like this. So I would say this increased visibility through digitalization and digital controls has huge ramifications, and particularly when looked at in the context of future developments in artificial intelligence and management, automation of these systems.
As a dyed-in-the-wool energy nerd, I was very excited by a recent Bloomberg article talking about how digitalization allows us to really nerd out, and then it snowballs and you get more and more into it, and before we know it, everyone's like thinking about every kilowatt hour that you can reduce. Amandine, did you want to weigh in as an energy economist? Is it just about pricing, or are there other ways that we can achieve behaviour change?
Look, I wouldn't call myself an energy economist, but thanks for the title. Look, I think for me, I would just be careful on how much we rely on behavior change to do things that are much more efficient to do in other ways, like mandates and standards. I think when it comes to energy efficiency, those tools can often be, more effective and more efficient. But there are opportunities, I think, where behavior change can lead to significant improvements in efficiency, and there's just not enough information about those. So I guess really picking the ones that you want to where you want to try to change behavior. And there's simple things like, when you've got an air conditioner, cleaning regularly your filter can really improve the efficiency of your air conditioning unit, like by 10 to 15% is often is what I've heard. And, I don't think people really know that and realize how frequently they're supposed to clean their filters and things like that. And there's also other really simple things, like half of Victorian households who use gas for heating also have an air conditioner in their house, often in their main living area. But I don't know that many people use those for heating. They usually use those for air conditioning. But if they started using those air conditioners when they only need heating in their main living area and when they don't need their whole house to be heated, they would save a lot of energy. So I think, really targeting information at some of those important, like those really high leverage points in terms of behavior change would be really valuable, and using more efficient and effective policy levers for things where we want broad scale improvements.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'd also point out, there's a lot of behavioral insights research that's now coming out over the last couple of decades, really, talking about things like the importance of defaults. And in India, for example, there's a policy there to sell air conditioners with a default setting. I think it is 24 degrees Celsius, which means that most people, when they take it out of the box, just turn it on, don't think about the default. And that can have a massive difference between, say, having a set point of 21 degrees. That 3 degrees difference could save a ton of energy. And the end user really doesn't notice the difference. They're comfortable in their home still. So there's various options here. I think we better wrap up. It is past 5 p.m. here in Australia, and Nick has a work day to start in Paris. So I would like to thank everyone for their questions and for joining us today. I think we saw about 100 attendees at peak period. So that's really great turnout for this one. I'd like to thank our panelists, Amandine Denis-Ryan from AIFA and Nicholas Howarth from IEA. For those of you who have posted questions, I'm happy to have a look through the list later on and have a crack at answering them separately. We will provide slides later, and I think we have recorded this and we'll be putting the recording up on our website too. Once again, thank you again for joining us, and thanks to our panelists. See you next time.